The dusty streets of Las Animas, Colorado had seen more rejection in the past 18 months than most towns witnessed in a decade. And it all centered around one woman who sat on her porch every evening like clockwork, turning away hopeful men with the same quiet finality as the setting sun. Zelda Morrison had been a widow for a year and a half when the first suitor came calling. She was 26 then, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes the color of Colorado sage. Her husband Thomas had died in a mining accident up in the mountains, leaving her the small ranch on the edge of town, and a grief so profound, it seemed to settle into her bones like winter frost. The townspeople had given her 6 months before they started suggesting she might want to consider remarrying. After all, a woman alone on a ranch was vulnerable, they said. She needed protection, they insisted. She needed a man, but Zelda had other thoughts entirely. The first man to formally ask for her hand was Marcus Hendricks, the banker's son who wore suits even in the sweltering heat and spoke about financial security as though it were the same as love. He arrived on her porch with flowers purchased from the general store and a rehearsed speech about combining their assets. "I appreciate your consideration, but no," Zelda had said, not even setting down the butter churn she had been working. Marcus had blinked, clearly not expecting such a swift dismissal. "Mrs. Morrison, perhaps you did not hear my entire proposal. I can offer you stability and respect within the community." "I heard you just fine. The answer is no." He left with his flowers still clutched in his hand, his face red with embarrassment. After Marcus came Gerald Thompson, a rancher from 3 properties over who was 15 years her senior and had buried 2 wives already. He seemed to think this experience made him an ideal candidate. "I know what a woman needs," he told her, standing too close while she hung laundry on the line. "I can take care of you proper." "I can take care of myself proper," Zelda replied, moving away to grab another wet sheet. "Thank you for stopping by, but no." Gerald was more persistent than Marcus, returning 3 more times before Zelda finally had to threaten to fetch her shotgun if he did not respect her wishes. He finally got the message and stopped coming around, though he complained loudly at the saloon that she was an ungrateful woman who did not know what was good for her. Then came Samuel Peters, the school teacher who wrote her poetry that did not scan properly and compared her eyes to mud. After him was Dutch Carver, a gambler passing through who thought a widow with property might be an easy mark. Then Robert Finch, then Aaron Cunningham, then a parade of others whose names started to blur together in Zelda's mind. Each one seemed to think they knew what she needed better than she knew herself. Each one saw a widow and a ranch and an opportunity. Not one of them saw her. The rejections became legend in Las Animas. Men would dare each other to try their luck with the beautiful widow Morrison. Some approached it as a challenge, others as a joke. A few seemed genuinely interested at first, but their true colors always showed through quickly enough. They wanted a housekeeper or a nurse or someone to warm their bed. They wanted her land. They wanted the respectability of a wife without caring about the actual woman they would be marrying. Zelda rejected them all with the same calm politeness, never raising her voice, never showing anger. She simply said no and went back to her work. The townspeople gossiped endlessly about it. Some called her proud. Others said she was being impractical. The more charitable ones suggested she was still grieving and would come around eventually. None of them seemed to consider that maybe, just maybe, she was happy on her own. Because the truth was, Zelda had discovered something in her widowhood that surprised her. She liked her independence. She liked making her own decisions about when to plant and when to harvest, how to spend her money, what time to eat supper. She had loved Thomas truly, but their marriage had been arranged by their families when she was 18, and she had gone from her father's house to her husband's house without ever knowing what it meant to answer only to herself. Now she knew, and she was not eager to give it up. The ranch was small but manageable. She had 6 head of cattle, a dozen chickens, a vegetable garden that produced well, and a mare named Dusty who had more sense than most of the men who came courting. She hired help when she needed it for the heavier work, paying fairly from the modest savings Thomas had left and the money she made selling eggs and vegetables in town. It was not an easy life, but it was hers, and that mattered more than comfort. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn into winter. The suitors kept coming, though less frequently as word spread that the widow Morrison was simply not interested. Zelda settled into a peaceful routine, rising with the sun, working her land, sitting on her porch in the evenings with a book or her mending. She was content, or as content as a woman who had loved and lost could be. It was early April of 1884 when Lucas McCoy rode into Las Animas on a dusty bay gelding, looking for work. He was a tall man, lean from hard labor, with sun-weathered skin and light brown hair that tended to fall across his forehead no matter how many times he pushed it back. His eyes were a clear gray, the kind that seemed to notice everything without making a show of looking. He was 28 years old and had spent most of his adult life drifting from ranch to ranch, working as a cowhand wherever he could find employment. Lucas was not a talkative man by nature. He had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had learned early that in a loud family, sometimes the best way to be heard was to stay quiet and let your actions speak. His father had died when Lucas was 12, and his mother had remarried a man who made it clear he did not want another man's children underfoot. Lucas had left at 16 and had been on his own ever since. He found work at the Triple Bar Ranch, owned by a man named Edward Cole, a fair employer who paid on time and did not work his men to death. The job came with a bunk in the ranch house and 3 meals a day, which was more than Lucas had at some of his previous positions. He settled in quickly, proving himself capable with horses and cattle both. It was on his second Sunday in town that Lucas first saw Zelda Morrison. He had ridden into Las Animas proper to mail a letter to his brother and to pick up some tobacco from the general store. She was standing outside the store, loading supplies into the back of a wagon, and something about the way she moved caught his attention. There was a competence to her actions, a quiet confidence that spoke of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and did not need help to do it. She was beautiful too, Lucas could not help but notice, but it was a natural beauty, unadorned and honest. She wore a simple blue calico dress and a sunbonnet that shaded her face, her sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms tanned from outdoor work. As he watched, a man approached her, someone Lucas did not recognize, and began speaking. Even from a distance, Lucas could see the woman's posture stiffen slightly, could see the polite but firm shake of her head. The man persisted, moving closer, and the woman took a deliberate step back. Lucas found himself moving forward before he had consciously decided to do so. "Afternoon," he said quietly as he approached, nodding to both of them. "Everything all right here?" The man, who had slicked back hair and a fancy vest, looked annoyed at the interruption. "This is a private conversation." "Did not look particularly private standing out on the street and all," Lucas replied, his tone still mild but with an edge of steel underneath. He looked at the woman. "Madam, you need anything?" Zelda assessed him quickly, taking in his worn but clean clothes, his weathered hands, and the genuine concern in his gray eyes. "I am fine, thank you. This gentleman was just leaving." The fancy man looked like he wanted to argue, but something about Lucas's quiet presence seemed to change his mind. He muttered something under his breath and stalked off toward the saloon. "Thank you for that," Zelda said, turning her attention back to her supplies. "Though I had it handled." "I expect you did," Lucas agreed. "Just thought an interruption might speed things along." He tipped his hat. "Lucas McCoy, I am working out at the Triple Bar. Zelda Morrison, I have the small ranch east of town." She secured the last of her supplies and brushed her hands on her apron. "You are new to Las Animas. Arrived about 2 weeks back. Still learning who is who and what is what. Well, you will learn quickly enough that I am the town's stubborn widow who refuses all offers of marriage, no matter how persistent the asker." There was a hint of humor in her voice, but also weariness. Lucas considered this information. "Sounds like you have got your reasons. None of my business either way." This response seemed to surprise her. She looked at him more carefully, really seeing him for the first time. "Most people around here think it is very much their business. Most people think a lot of things that are not necessarily true," Lucas said simply. He touched the brim of his hat again. "Good day to you, Mrs. Morrison. Hope the rest of your afternoon is peaceful." He walked away without another word, heading into the general store to conduct his business. Zelda stood beside her wagon for a moment longer, watching him go with a thoughtful expression on her face. Then she climbed up onto the wagon seat and drove home, though she found herself thinking about the quiet cowboy more than once during the drive. Lucas did not give the encounter much more thought at the time. He was busy with work at the Triple Bar, and when he was not working, he was usually too tired to do much more than eat supper and fall into his bunk. But fate had a way of arranging things, and 2 weeks later, he encountered Zelda Morrison again. He had been in town to pick up some medical supplies for one of the ranch horses who had cut his leg on barbed wire. On his way back to where he had tied his own horse, he passed a small church with a tidy cemetery behind it. The church was whitewashed wood with a simple steeple, and the cemetery was surrounded by a low iron fence. Sitting on a bench just inside the cemetery gate was Zelda Morrison, her head bowed, a bouquet of wildflowers in her lap. Lucas might have walked on by and left her to her private moment, but at that exact second, she looked up and their eyes met. Her face was composed, but he could see the faint tracks of tears on her cheeks. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the distance. Then Lucas did something he had not planned to do. He tied his horse to the fence, opened the cemetery gate, and walked slowly toward her bench. He did not speak, did not offer platitudes about grief or time healing all wounds. He simply looked at the bench, looked at her, and asked the simplest question in the world. "Can I just sit with you?" Zelda stared at him, clearly not expecting this. Every other man who had approached her in the past year and a half had wanted something from her, had come with agendas and expectations. This man was asking for nothing except permission to share her space. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas thought about it for a moment. "Because sometimes it is easier to be sad when you are not alone. And because I am not going to tell you everything will be fine, or that you should move on, or any of the other things people say that do not actually help." Something in Zelda's chest, something that had been locked up tight for 18 months, began to crack just slightly. She moved over on the bench, making room. "You can sit." Lucas sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. He took off his hat and held it in his hands, looking out at the rows of grave markers without speaking. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the ground. Birds sang in the branches overhead. The world continued on, indifferent to human grief. They sat like that for perhaps 20 minutes. Zelda did not cry again, but she did not have to pretend to be strong either. She simply sat with her flowers and her memories, and Lucas sat beside her, a quiet presence that demanded nothing. Eventually, she stood, and he stood with her. "Thank you," she said softly. "Nothing to thank me for," Lucas replied. "I just sat." "That was exactly what I needed," Zelda said, and she meant it. She walked to a grave marker that read Thomas Morrison, beloved husband, and placed the wildflowers at its base. She stood there for another moment, her hand resting on the top of the stone, then turned and walked back toward the gate. Lucas followed, setting his hat back on his head as they stepped out into the sunshine. "Can I ask you something?" Zelda said as they paused beside Lucas's horse. "Sure." "Why did you really stop? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Lucas was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I lost my father when I was 12. For months afterward, everyone kept telling me to be strong, to be the man of the house, to take care of my mother. No one ever just let me be sad. I remember thinking how much better it would have felt if someone had just sat with me and let me feel what I was feeling without trying to fix it." He met her eyes. "Guess I just wanted to be for someone else what no one was for me back then." Zelda felt that crack in her chest widen a little more. "That is a kind thing to do." "Just a human thing," Lucas said. He untied his horse but did not mount immediately. "I am not going to ask to court you or come calling or anything else, Mrs. Morrison. But if you ever want someone to just sit with you again, I am usually in town on Sunday afternoons. I will be around." He swung up into his saddle, tipped his hat one more time, and rode off toward the Triple Bar, leaving Zelda standing in the street watching him go with a curious feeling blooming in her chest that she could not quite name. The next Sunday, Zelda found herself walking toward the cemetery in the afternoon, though she had already visited Thomas's grave earlier in the week. She told herself she just wanted to make sure the flowers she had left were holding up, but that was not entirely true. She was curious to see if the quiet cowboy would be there. He was. Lucas was sitting on the same bench they had shared, his hat beside him, looking perfectly content to wait without knowing if she would come or not. When he saw her approaching, he did not look smug or victorious. He just smiled slightly and moved his hat. "Can I just sit with you?" Zelda asked, echoing his words from the week before. "I would like that," Lucas said. She sat down beside him, a little closer than she had the previous week. They did not talk much at first. Lucas mentioned that the injured horse was healing well. Zelda commented that her garden was starting to come in nicely. Small talk, the kind that filled space without demanding anything. But as the afternoon wore on, their conversation deepened naturally. Zelda found herself telling him about Thomas, about how they had met, about the good parts of their marriage and the hard parts too. She was surprised at her own honesty, but something about Lucas's quiet attention made her feel safe to speak the truth. He did not judge or interrupt or try to compare her experience to his own. He just listened. In turn, Lucas told her a little about his own life, about his childhood in Texas, about the brother he still corresponded with who had a family now in San Antonio. He talked about the freedom of drifting from place to place, but also the loneliness of never putting down roots. His voice was low and measured, the voice of a man who did not waste words but chose them carefully when he did speak. When the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they both stood reluctantly. "Same time next week?" Lucas asked. "Yes," Zelda said without hesitation. "I would like that." And so it became their routine. Every Sunday afternoon, they would meet at the bench in the cemetery, and they would sit and talk. Sometimes Zelda would bring lemonade in a jar. Sometimes Lucas would bring candy from the general store that they would share. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from the profound to the mundane. Lucas told her about the different places he had worked, about sleeping under the stars and waking to find frost on his bedroll. Zelda told him about learning to run the ranch on her own, about the satisfaction she felt when she accomplished something difficult, about the loneliness of eating supper alone night after night. "You ever think about leaving?" Lucas asked one afternoon in early May. Selling the ranch and starting fresh somewhere else, Zelda considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I think about how hard I have worked to keep it going and how it feels like giving up would mean Thomas died for nothing. Does that make sense?" "It does," Lucas said. "Though I expect Thomas would want you to be happy more than he would want you to keep a piece of land going." "Maybe," Zelda admitted, "but I am not ready to let it go yet. And honestly, I am not sure I want to. I like the work. I like the independence. I just wish people would stop acting like it is some kind of tragedy that I am unmarried." "I think you are doing just fine," Lucas said quietly. "More than fine, actually. You are doing something brave." Zelda looked at him in surprise. "Brave? Sure. Most people just do what everyone expects them to do. You are choosing your own path even when everyone tells you that you are wrong. That takes courage." No one had ever framed her choices that way before. Most people called her stubborn or difficult or impractical. But Lucas called her brave, and coming from him, it felt like the highest compliment she had ever received. As May turned into June, Zelda noticed herself thinking about Lucas more and more during the week. She would be feeding the chickens and remember something funny he had said. She would be working in her garden and wonder what he was doing at the ranch. She started looking forward to Sundays with an anticipation that was more than just enjoying a friend's company. It scared her a little, this feeling. She had not planned to develop feelings for anyone, especially not so soon. It had only been 2 years since Thomas's death, and while the acute pain of grief had dulled to a manageable ache, she had not thought she was ready for anything new. But Lucas was different from every other man who had shown interest in her. He had not asked for anything. He had not pushed or pressured or assumed. He had just offered his presence, his listening ear, his quiet companionship. And somewhere in those simple offerings, Zelda had started to fall. She did not know if Lucas felt the same way. He was always kind to her, always seemed genuinely happy to see her, but he had kept his word about not courting her or trying to turn their friendship into something else. Sometimes, she caught him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, but he never acted on it, and she was simultaneously grateful and frustrated by his restraint. One Sunday in mid-June, Zelda arrived at the cemetery to find Lucas already there as usual, but this time he had a bundle wrapped in cloth beside him on the bench. "What is that?" she asked as she sat down. "Lunch," Lucas said simply. "I figured we have been sitting here for weeks, and we are always hungry by the time we part ways. Thought we might as well eat together." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal sandwiches, apples, and cookies that he admitted he had traded for at the boarding house where some of the triple bar hands ate their meals. It was not fancy, but it was thoughtful, and Zelda felt her heart squeeze at the gesture. They ate together in comfortable silence for a while, watching clouds drift across the blue Colorado sky. Then Lucas said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask," Zelda said. "I might not answer." "That is fair." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "All those men who came courting you last year and earlier this year, did any of them ever ask you what you wanted? What you were looking for?" Zelda thought back over the parade of suitors. "No, they all told me what they could offer me, what they thought I needed. But no one ever asked what I actually wanted." "What do you want?" Lucas asked, looking at her directly. It was such a simple question, but no one had ever posed it to her quite so plainly. Zelda set down her half-eaten sandwich and really considered her answer. "I want to be seen," she said finally. Not as a widow or as a piece of property or as someone who needs rescuing. Just as myself, as Zelda. I want someone who will listen when I talk about my day and who will tell me about theirs. I want someone who understands that I do not need them but chooses to stay anyway. I want a partner, not a master. She paused. And I want to feel something again. For the longest time after Thomas died, I felt numb. But lately, I have started feeling things again, and I realize how much I missed that. Lucas nodded slowly, taking in her words. That all sounds reasonable to me. What about you? Zelda asked, turning the question back on him. What do you want, Lucas? You have spent years drifting from place to place. What would make you want to stay somewhere? Lucas looked out across the cemetery, his expression thoughtful. I guess I always figured I would know it when I found it. A place that felt like home, people who felt like family. Something worth putting down roots for. He glanced at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. I think maybe I am starting to find those things here. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Zelda felt the air between them charged with something unspoken. But before either of them could say anything more, the church bells began to ring, signaling the hour, and the moment passed. They finished their lunch and talked of other things, but something had shifted between them, some acknowledgement of feelings that had not been there before, or at least had not been spoken. When they parted that day, Lucas's hand brushed against hers as they said goodbye, and Zelda felt the touch like a spark. She rode home in a daze, her mind whirling. She was developing feelings for Lucas McCoy. There was no denying it anymore. But what did she want to do about it? Was she ready to open herself up to the possibility of love again? Was he even interested in her that way, or was she reading too much into a casual friendship? That week seemed to crawl by. Zelda threw herself into her work, but her thoughts kept drifting to Lucas. She remembered the way he had first approached her, asking if he could sit with her. She thought about all their conversations, the way he really listened, the way he saw her as a complete person rather than a problem to be solved. She remembered his question about what she wanted, and realized that what she wanted was him, in whatever form he was willing to be in her life. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. When Sunday finally arrived, Zelda dressed with more care than usual, choosing her nicest day dress and braiding her hair in a more elaborate style. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that this was just another Sunday like all the others, but her racing heart knew better. She arrived at the cemetery to find Lucas already there, but he was not sitting on the bench. He was standing beside it, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, and he looked nervous. "Hi," Zelda said, suddenly feeling shy. "Hi," Lucas replied. He held out the flowers. "These are for you. Not for your husband's grave, if that makes a difference. For you." Zelda took the flowers, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you, they are beautiful." "Zelda," Lucas said, and the way he said her name, soft and serious, made her look up at him. "I need to be honest with you about something. These past few months, sitting with you, talking with you, I have been happier than I have been in years. You are smart and strong and funny, and you see the world in a way that makes me want to see it better too. I told myself I was just going to be your friend, that I was not going to push for anything more, but the truth is I have feelings for you. Real feelings." Zelda's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Lucas, wait, let me finish," he said quickly. "I know you have been through a lot. I know you have had men lining up to pressure you into something you do not want. That is not what I am doing here. I am not asking you to marry me. I am not asking you to make any kind of decision. I just needed you to know how I feel, because keeping it secret was starting to eat at me. If you just want to be friends, I can do that. I will take whatever you are willing to give me." Zelda looked down at the wildflowers in her hands, then back up at Lucas's earnest face. This man had shown her nothing but respect and patience. He had given her space to grieve, time to heal, and had asked for nothing in return. He had seen her as she was and had not tried to change her. And now he was standing here, vulnerable and honest, offering her his heart without demanding she take it. "I have feelings for you too," she said, and watched his eyes widen in surprise. "I did not plan to. I told myself I was happy on my own, and I am. But you make me want to be happy with someone again. You make me remember what it is like to share your life with another person, the good parts of that. And I think I want to see where this goes, if you are willing to be patient with me." The smile that broke across Lucas's face was like sunshine. "I can be patient. I have got nothing but time and patience where you are concerned." "Then maybe," Zelda said, feeling bold, "we could start meeting somewhere other than a cemetery. Do not get me wrong, this bench has been good to us, but it might be nice to have a conversation somewhere a little less morbid." Lucas laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that Zelda realized she had never heard from him before. "I think that is a fine idea. Would you like to have dinner with me next Sunday? There is a restaurant in town, nothing fancy, but the food is decent." "I would like that very much," Zelda said. They stood there grinning at each other like fools for a moment, then Lucas offered her his arm. "Walk with me?" he asked. "Yes," Zelda said, tucking her hand into the crook of his elbow. "Yes, I will." They walked through the cemetery together, out the gate and down the main street of Las Animas. People stared at them, and Zelda knew the gossip would be flying by nightfall, but for once she did not care. Let them talk. She was happy, genuinely happy, for the first time in years. They spent the rest of that afternoon walking and talking, exploring the edges of town they had never visited together. Lucas told her more about his work at the Triple Bar, about his hopes of maybe saving up enough to start his own small ranch someday. Zelda talked about her plans for expanding her vegetable garden and maybe getting a few more head of cattle. "We could help each other," Lucas said thoughtfully. "I mean, if things work out between us. 2 small ranches working together could accomplish more than either one alone." "Are you already planning our future, Mr. McCoy?" Zelda teased gently. Lucas had the grace to look embarrassed. "Sorry, I am getting ahead of myself." "It is all right," Zelda said, squeezing his arm. "I like that you can see a future with me in it. I like it very much." When the sun began to set, Lucas insisted on riding home with her to make sure she got there safely. They talked the whole way, the conversation flowing as easily as it always had, but now with an added undercurrent of excitement and possibility. When they reached her property, Lucas helped her down from her wagon, his hands warm and steady on her waist. "Thank you for today," Zelda said. "For being honest with me." "Thank you for not running away screaming," Lucas replied with a small smile. "I will see you next Sunday," Zelda asked. "You will see me before that if you come into town," Lucas pointed out. "I am not going to avoid you just because we are courting now." "We are courting?" Zelda asked, raising an eyebrow. "I do not remember agreeing to that specifically." "Well, what would you call it?" Zelda pretended to think about it. "I suppose courting is as good a word as any, though it is going to be courting on my terms, Lucas McCoy. I am not giving up my independence just because we are seeing each other." "I would not want you to," Lucas said seriously. "Your independence is part of what makes you who you are. I am not here to take that away from you, Zelda. I am just here to walk beside you while you live your life." Zelda felt tears prick at her eyes, good tears this time. "You say the most perfect things sometimes." "Only when I mean them," Lucas said. He lifted her hand and kissed it gently, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and sweet. "Good night, Zelda." "Good night, Lucas." She stood on her porch and watched him ride away until he disappeared into the gathering dusk. Then went inside with the wildflowers still clutched in her hand. and a smile on her face that lasted long into the evening. The news that the widow Morrison was courting the new cowboy from the Triple Bar spread through Las Animas like wildfire. Some people were surprised. Others were scandalized that she had rejected so many suitable men only to choose a drifting ranch hand. But there were also those who had watched Zelda struggle through her grief and were simply happy to see her smiling again. Marcus Hendricks, the banker's son who had been one of her first rejected suitors, made a point of stopping her outside the general store one day. "I hope you know what you are doing," he said, his tone suggesting he thought she did not. "That cowboy has no property, no prospects. What can he possibly offer you?" Zelda looked at him coolly. "He offers me respect, kindness, and genuine companionship. That is worth more than all the property in Colorado." "You will regret this," Marcus said stiffly. "I have regretted many things in my life, Marcus, but I can promise you Lucas McCoy will not be one of them," Zelda replied, and walked away with her head held high. True to his word, Lucas did not try to rush things or push for more than Zelda was ready to give. They saw each other once or twice a week, sometimes in town, sometimes at her ranch where he would help her with heavier work in exchange for supper. He never stayed late or did anything that could be considered improper. He was a perfect gentleman, attentive without being overbearing, affectionate without being presumptuous. One evening in July, Lucas came over to help Zelda fix a section of fence that had been damaged in a storm. They worked side by side in the fading light, and Zelda found herself studying him when he was not looking. He had good hands, strong and capable, and there was something deeply appealing about the way he approached every task with the same quiet competence. "You are staring," Lucas said without looking up, but she could hear the smile in his voice. "I am admiring," Zelda corrected. "There is a difference." "Is there now?" Lucas straightened up and wiped his brow. "And what exactly are you admiring?" "Your fence-fixing abilities," Zelda said innocently. "What else would I be admiring?" "I have no idea, madam," Lucas replied, playing along, "though I do hope it is my rugged good looks and charming personality." Zelda laughed. "Your modesty is truly overwhelming." They finished the fence as the last light faded from the sky, and Zelda invited Lucas in for supper as she always did. She had a pot of stew that had been simmering all day, and she ladled out generous portions for both of them. They ate at her small kitchen table, the lamp casting a warm glow over everything. "This is nice," Lucas said quietly. "Sitting here with you like this, it feels like home." Zelda felt her chest tighten with emotion. "It does, doesn't it?" After supper, they sat on her porch together, watching the stars come out. It was a warm night, and the air was full of the chirping of crickets and the distant call of an owl. Lucas had his arm around Zelda's shoulders, and she was leaning against him, feeling more content than she had in years. "Can I ask you something?" Lucas said after a long, comfortable silence. "Always. When you think about the future, what do you see?" Zelda was quiet for a moment, really considering the question. "I see my ranch thriving. I see myself still working the land, still making my own choices. But I also see someone beside me, sharing the work and the rewards. I see laughter and companionship and maybe, eventually, children." She paused. "What do you see?" "Something very similar," Lucas said. "I see a place to call home, finally. I see a woman I love and who loves me back. I see building something together, something that lasts." He hesitated. "Does that scare you, me talking about love?" "A little," Zelda admitted, "but in a good way. Like standing at the edge of something new and exciting and not quite knowing what will happen next." "That is exactly what it is like," Lucas agreed. He turned to face her more fully. "Zelda, I know we have only been courting for about a month, but I need you to know that I am serious about you. This is not some passing fancy for me. I have been searching for home my whole life, and I found it when I met you." Zelda reached up and cupped his face in her hand. "I am serious about you too, Lucas. More serious than I ever thought I would be again." "Then I have to ask you something," Lucas said, and Zelda could hear the nervousness in his voice. "And you can say no, or you can say it is too soon, or whatever you need to say. But I have to ask because if I do not, I am going to burst." "Ask me," Zelda said, her heart racing. "Would you consider marrying me?" "Not right away," Lucas added quickly. "We can have a long engagement if you want. I just need to know if that is something you might want eventually, because if it is not, I need to know that now before I fall any harder for you than I already have." Zelda looked at this good, honest man who had asked her such a simple question all those weeks ago. "Can I just sit with you?" That question had changed everything. He had not tried to sweep her off her feet or convince her she needed him. He had just offered his presence, his companionship, his quiet strength, and in doing so he had won her heart completely. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I would consider it. More than consider it, actually. I would like to marry you, Lucas McCoy, when we are both ready." The smile on Lucas's face was radiant. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and kissed her gently. It was Zelda's first kiss since Thomas had died, and it felt like coming back to life. She kissed him back, her arms winding around his neck, and for a long moment they stayed like that, wrapped up in each other under the stars. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "I am going to do this right," Lucas said. "I am going to save up money for a proper ring. I am going to ask you properly, down on one knee and everything. But for now, I just needed to know that you would say yes when I did." "I will say yes," Zelda promised. "Whenever you ask, the answer will be yes." They sat together on the porch until late into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams. Lucas would continue working at the Triple Bar and saving his money. Zelda would keep running her ranch. When they married, they would combine their resources and work both properties, maybe hire some help to manage the workload. They would build a life together, one based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. As the weeks passed, their relationship deepened. They stole moments together whenever they could, and Lucas became a regular fixture at Zelda's ranch. The townspeople grew accustomed to seeing them together, and while there were still some who disapproved, most people came to accept that the widow Morrison had found happiness again. In late August, Lucas took Zelda on a picnic up into the foothills above Las Animas. They rode together on their horses, with Lucas leading the way to a spot he had discovered during one of his workdays with the Triple Bar cattle. It was a small meadow surrounded by aspens, with a clear stream running through it and a view of the valley below that took Zelda's breath away. "Lucas, this is beautiful," she said, looking around in wonder. "I thought you might like it," Lucas said, helping her down from her horse. "I have been wanting to bring you here for weeks, but the timing never seemed right." They spread a blanket under one of the aspens and ate the lunch Zelda had packed, fresh bread and cheese and cold chicken. After they ate, they lay back on the blanket and watched the clouds drift by overhead, their hands intertwined between them. "I have been thinking," Lucas said after a while. "About what?" "About us, about the future. I think I have saved enough for a ring now. Nothing too fancy, but something that shows how I feel about you." Zelda turned her head to look at him. "You do not have to spend a lot of money on a ring, Lucas. That is not what matters to me." "I know," Lucas said, "but I want to. I want you to have something beautiful, something you can look at and remember this time, remember how we chose each other." "I will never forget," Zelda said softly. "Ring or no ring." Lucas sat up and pulled Zelda up with him. Then, to her surprise, he slid off the blanket and down onto one knee in the soft grass. "I know I said I was going to wait until I had the ring," Lucas said, reaching into his pocket. "But I could not wait any more. I bought this last week, and I have been carrying it around ever since, waiting for the right moment. And this feels like the right moment." He opened a small box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire set in it. It was not ostentatious or flashy, but it was lovely in its simplicity. "Zelda Morrison," Lucas said, looking up at her with those clear gray eyes that saw right into her soul. "You are the strongest, bravest, most genuine person I have ever met. You make me want to be better. You make me want to put down roots and build something lasting. I love you with everything I am, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Zelda's face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he stood up and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply while the aspen leaves whispered above them and the stream bubbled nearby. It was a perfect moment, one that Zelda knew she would remember for the rest of her life. They set their wedding date for early October, after the harvest was in, and before the worst of the winter weather set in. It would be a simple ceremony in the same church where Zelda had sat grieving her first husband. But this time, she would walk down the aisle toward joy instead of away from sorrow. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Zelda sewed herself a new dress, cream-colored calico with blue trim that matched her ring. Lucas bought himself a new shirt and had his one good suit cleaned and pressed. They made arrangements with the minister and decided to have a small reception at Zelda's ranch, with food provided by the ladies of the church and music from a fiddle player who lived in town. Not everyone was happy about the upcoming wedding. Marcus Hendricks made his disapproval known every chance he got, and Gerald Thompson, the persistent rancher who had wanted to make Zelda his third wife, grumbled to anyone who would listen that she was making a mistake. But there were more people who were genuinely happy for them, including Edward Cole from the Triple Bar, who told Lucas he would give him a raise so he could better provide for his new wife. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, genuinely moved. "That means a lot to me." "You are a good worker and a good man," Edward said gruffly. "You deserve some happiness, and that Morrison woman, she is something special. You treat her right." "I intend to," Lucas promised. The night before the wedding, Zelda stood on her porch and looked out at the land she had fought so hard to keep. Tomorrow, it would become their land, hers and Lucas's together. She was not losing anything by marrying him. Instead, she was gaining a partner, someone to share the burden and the beauty of this life she had built. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had shared. She had loved him truly, even though their marriage had been arranged. But what she had with Lucas was different, deeper somehow. Lucas had seen her at her worst, had sat with her in her grief, and had never tried to fix her or change her. He had just loved her as she was. "I hope you understand," she whispered into the night, not sure if she was talking to Thomas's memory or to the universe in general. "I will always remember you, but I am ready to move forward now. I am ready to live again." The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, with a crisp autumn chill in the air that promised a perfect day. Zelda dressed carefully in her new dress, and her neighbor Mrs. Peabody came over to help her with her hair, piling it up in an elegant style that was far fancier than anything Zelda usually wore. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Peabody said, her eyes misty. "That Lucas is a lucky man." "I am pretty lucky too," Zelda replied, meaning it. The ceremony was set for 2 in the afternoon. Zelda arrived at the church in a wagon driven by Edward Cole, who had offered to give her away since she had no family in Las Animas. Lucas was already there, standing at the front of the church with his brother Daniel, who had traveled all the way from San Antonio to serve as best man. Zelda had been touched when she learned Lucas had written to his brother and invited him, and even more touched when Daniel had agreed to come despite the distance. As she walked down the aisle, Zelda kept her eyes on Lucas. He looked almost stunned, staring at her as though he could not quite believe she was real. When she reached him and took his hand, his fingers were trembling slightly. "You are shaking," she whispered. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," Lucas whispered back. "I am terrified I am going to wake up and find out this was all a dream." "It is real," Zelda assured him. "I am real, and I am here, and I am choosing you." The ceremony was short and sweet. The minister spoke about love and commitment and partnership, about two people choosing to walk through life together. When it came time for the vows, Lucas spoke his clearly and firmly, promising to love and honor and cherish Zelda for the rest of his days. Zelda promised the same, her voice strong despite the tears on her cheeks. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Lucas cupped Zelda's face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, and the small crowd gathered in the church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, and out into the golden October sunshine. The reception at the ranch was exactly what Zelda had hoped it would be, simple and joyful. There was food and music and dancing. Lucas turned out to be a surprisingly good dancer, twirling Zelda around the yard they had cleared for the purpose while the fiddle player sawed away at a lively tune. Even some of the people who had disapproved of their match seemed caught up in the celebration. As the sun began to set, Daniel found Zelda standing by the refreshment table. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. "Of course," Zelda said. Daniel was a few years older than Lucas, with the same gray eyes but a more weathered face. He looked like a man who had worked hard and lived harder. "I just wanted to thank you," Daniel said, "for making my brother happy. Lucas and we had it rough growing up after our pa died. Our stepfather was not kind to us. Lucas left home younger than he should have had to, and he has been drifting ever since. I always worried about him, worried he would never find a place to belong. But when he wrote me about you, I could tell something had changed." He sounded happy for the first time in years. Zelda felt her eyes well up. "He makes me happy too, happier than I thought I would ever be again." "That is all I needed to hear," Daniel said. He squeezed her shoulder gently. "You take care of each other." "We will," Zelda promised. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Zelda and Lucas stood together on the porch, waving goodbye. When the last guest had left and they were finally alone, Lucas turned to his new wife and grinned. "So, Mrs. McCoy, what do you want to do now?" Zelda pretended to think about it. "Well, we do have all this leftover food to put away." "That is what you want to do on our wedding night, put away food." "I am practical," Zelda said with a shrug, but she was smiling. "Besides, the food is not going anywhere. We have time." They did put away the food, working together efficiently, their movements already synchronized from all the time they had spent working side by side. Then Lucas picked Zelda up, making her squeal with laughter, and carried her over the threshold into what was now their home. That night, for the first time in years, Zelda did not fall asleep alone. She fell asleep in her husband's arms, feeling safe and loved and exactly where she belonged. The next morning, they woke early out of habit, even though they had nowhere they needed to be. They made breakfast together, eggs from Zelda's chickens and bacon from the smokehouse. As they ate, they made plans for the day. "We should ride out and check the fences on the north pasture," Zelda said. "I have been meaning to do that for weeks, but I got distracted with wedding preparations." "We can do that," Lucas agreed. And I should probably ride over to the Triple Bar at some point and let Mr. Cole know when I will be back to work." "You are still planning to work there?" Zelda asked. "I thought maybe we would just focus on our ranch now." "We will," Lucas assured her. "But I would like to keep the job for a while longer if Mr. Cole will have me. The extra income will help us build up our savings, and it is not like the work is far away. I can still be home most nights." Zelda considered this. "That makes sense. I just do not want you working yourself to death." "I will be careful," Lucas promised. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Besides, I have too much to live for now to risk wearing myself out." They spent the morning riding the property together, checking fences and looking over the cattle. Lucas had a good eye for what needed work and what could wait, and Zelda appreciated having his input. They made plans for improvements, talking about expanding the herd next spring and maybe planting some additional crops. As they worked, Zelda marveled at how natural it felt to be married to Lucas. There was none of the awkwardness she might have expected. They fell into routines easily, complementing each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. When Zelda got frustrated trying to untangle a section of barbed wire, Lucas quietly took over without making her feel incompetent. When Lucas struggled with the latch on one of the gates, Zelda showed him the trick to opening it without comment. That evening they sat together on the porch just as they had done so many times before, but now Lucas's arm was around Zelda's shoulders and she was wearing his ring. "Are you happy?" Lucas asked softly. "I am," Zelda said, and she meant it with her whole heart. "Are you?" "Happier than I have ever been," Lucas replied. "I finally found where I belong." The first months of their marriage were blissful. They worked hard during the day and fell into each other's arms at night. They laughed together and planned together and occasionally argued about minor things like how to organize the barn or whether they needed a new rooster. But they always talked through their disagreements with respect and affection. As winter set in, Lucas did continue working at the Triple Bar several days a week, but he was always home before dark, and he never worked on Sundays. Those were their days, reserved for church in the morning and quiet time together in the afternoon. Sometimes they would visit with friends, but often they just stayed home, enjoying the peace of their own company. In January, Zelda realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then another, before she finally said anything to Lucas. They were sitting by the fire on a cold evening in March when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I think we are going to have a baby," she said softly. Lucas stared at her, his eyes wide with shock and joy. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." "I am 3 months along, I think." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Zelda confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Lucas said. He kissed her deeply, then pulled back and looked at her with concern. "But what about you? How are you feeling? Do you need to sit down? Should you be doing all the work you have been doing?" "I am fine," Zelda assured him. "Women have been having babies while running ranches for centuries. I am not made of glass." But Lucas insisted on taking over more of the heavy work, and Zelda had to admit it was nice to have the help. As her pregnancy progressed and her belly grew, she found herself tiring more easily. Lucas was attentive without being overbearing, always making sure she had eaten enough, had rested enough, was taking care of herself. In May, Zelda started feeling the baby move, little flutters at first that grew stronger as the weeks passed. Lucas would lay his head on her belly at night, talking to their unborn child, telling stories about his day and promising to be the best father he could be. "What should we name the baby?" Zelda asked one night. "I do not know," Lucas admitted. "What do you like?" They discussed names over the next few weeks, debating the merits of various options. If it was a boy, Lucas liked the name James after his father. If it was a girl, Zelda liked the name Sarah, which had been her grandmother's name. "James McCoy," Lucas said, trying it out. "That sounds strong." "Sarah McCoy," Zelda countered. "That sounds elegant." "Either way," Lucas said, kissing Zelda's swollen belly, "this baby is going to be loved." In early September, as the autumn colors were just beginning to touch the aspen trees on the hillsides, Zelda went into labor. It was early morning, and Lucas had just gotten up to start the stove when Zelda felt the first contraction. She had been through this before in a sense, having helped deliver babies for other women in the community, but experiencing it herself was entirely different. "Lucas," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "I think it is time." Lucas went pale. "Time? Like time? "Yes, time," Zelda said, breathing through another contraction. "You need to fetch Mrs. Peabody and the midwife." Lucas practically ran to saddle his horse, riding hard into town to collect the women who would help with the delivery. By the time he got back with them, Zelda's contractions were coming regularly, and she was breathing heavily through the pain. The labor lasted through the morning and into the afternoon. Lucas stayed by Zelda's side the whole time, holding her hand and letting her squeeze until his fingers went numb. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths and whispered encouragement even when she cursed at him and told him this was all his fault. "I know," he said, kissing her temple. "And I am so sorry, but you are doing amazing, Zelda. You are so strong." Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, the baby came. The midwife caught the squalling infant and announced, "It is a boy. You have a healthy baby boy." She cleaned the baby quickly and placed him on Zelda's chest. Zelda looked down at her son, at his red, scrunched-up face and his tiny fists waving in the air, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not thought possible. "Hello, James," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Lucas was openly crying, staring at his son with an expression of pure wonder. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Zelda, he is absolutely perfect." The midwife and Mrs. Peabody bustled around, cleaning up and making sure Zelda was comfortable. They showed Lucas how to hold the baby properly, and he sat in the rocking chair with his son in his arms, looking like he had been given the greatest gift in the world. "Thank you," Lucas said to Zelda, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for him, for everything." "Thank you," Zelda replied. "For being here, for being you, for giving me this life." The first few weeks with baby James were exhausting but joyful. He was a good baby for the most part, though he had his fussy moments, especially in the evenings. Lucas and Zelda took turns walking him, bouncing him, singing to him. They marveled over every little thing he did. His first smile, his attempts to follow them with his eyes, the way his tiny hand would wrap around their fingers. Lucas cut back his hours at the Triple Bar so he could be home more to help with the baby and the ranch work. Edward Cole was understanding, having raised children of his own. "Family comes first," he told Lucas. "Always." As the months passed, James grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and he had a laugh that could light up the darkest room. Zelda and Lucas fell even more in love with each other, watching how they each cared for their son. Lucas was a natural father, patient and gentle, never complaining about the late-night feedings or the dirty diapers. Zelda was a devoted mother, but she also made sure to maintain her own identity, still working the ranch and making decisions about their property. When James was about 6 months old, Daniel came to visit again, this time bringing his wife Maria and their 3 children. The cousins were all older than James, but they doted on the baby, making him laugh with their antics. One evening, while the children were playing outside under Maria's supervision and James was napping, Daniel and Lucas sat on the porch with Zelda, drinking coffee and catching up. "You have made a good life here," Daniel observed, looking around at the well-maintained ranch. "I am proud of you, little brother." "I got lucky," Lucas said, reaching over to take Zelda's hand. "I found someone who saw me for who I really was and loved me anyway." "That is not luck," Zelda said. "That is choosing to see the good in each other every day." "You are both right," Daniel said with a smile. "That is what makes a good marriage, luck and choice combined." After Daniel and his family left, the ranch seemed quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet. Zelda and Lucas fell back into their routines, caring for James and the ranch in equal measure. As summer turned to autumn and autumn to winter again, they found themselves more in love than ever. One evening in December, they were sitting by the fire while James played with wooden blocks on a blanket at their feet. Zelda looked around at the home they had built together, at the man she loved and the child they had created, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "You remember," she said softly, "when you first asked if you could sit with me?" "In the cemetery." "Of course," Lucas said. "How could I forget?" "That was the day that changed everything." "I was so lost back then," Zelda continued. "I thought I had my life figured out. I was going to be alone and independent, and that was going to be enough. But you showed me that I did not have to choose between independence and love. You showed me I could have both." Lucas pulled her closer. "You showed me what home felt like. I had been searching for it my whole life, and I found it with you." "Can I just sit with you?" Zelda asked, echoing his words from that day. "Always," Lucas replied. "For the rest of our lives, always." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their son play, listening to the crackle of the fire and the wind outside. It was a simple moment, but it was perfect, the kind of moment that makes up a life well lived. The years passed peacefully for the McCoy family. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping his father with the horses and his mother in the garden. When he was 3, Zelda became pregnant again, and this time the labor was shorter and somewhat easier. They welcomed a daughter they named Sarah, just as they had discussed years before. She had her father's quiet demeanor but her mother's stubborn streak, a combination that promised to keep them on their toes. Lucas eventually left his position at the Triple Bar to focus full-time on their own growing ranch. With both of them working together, they expanded their herd and their crops, becoming one of the more successful small ranches in the area. They hired occasional help during busy seasons but mostly managed on their own, the way they preferred. When James was 8 and Sarah was 5, Zelda became pregnant one more time, a surprise but a welcome one. This time they had another son, whom they named Daniel after Lucas's brother. The ranch house had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Lucas spent most of a summer building on 2 additional rooms with help from Edward Cole and some of the men from the Triple Bar. Life was full and busy, but it was good. The children grew healthy and happy, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. Lucas never lost his quiet, steady demeanor, but Zelda discovered he had a playful side that came out with the children. She would often find him wrestling with James and Daniel in the yard, or carefully braiding Sarah's hair while she chattered away about her day. As for Zelda, she had found the perfect balance she had always been searching for. She was a wife, a mother, and a rancher, each role important and fulfilling in its own way. She never felt like she had lost herself in marriage the way she had feared. Instead, she had found more of herself, discovered depths of strength and capacity for love she had not known she possessed. The townspeople of Las Animas, who had once gossiped about the stubborn widow and the drifting cowboy, now spoke of them with respect and fondness. The McCoys were known as good neighbors, hard workers and devoted parents. Young couples would sometimes ask them for advice, and both Lucas and Zelda would always say the same thing: listen to each other, respect each other, and never stop choosing each other every single day. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Zelda by taking her back up to the meadow in the foothills where he had proposed. They left the children with Mrs. Peabody for the afternoon and rode out together on a beautiful October day, the aspens turning gold around them just as they had been that day years before. They spread out a blanket in the same spot and lay side by side, holding hands and watching the clouds drift by. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked. "Marrying me instead of one of those other men who came courting. Some of them could have given you an easier life." Zelda turned her head to look at him. "Lucas McCoy, in 10 years of marriage, you have given me 3 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, and more love than I thought possible. Every single day, I wake up grateful that you were brave enough to sit with me in that cemetery and patient enough to wait for me to be ready. I have never regretted choosing you, not for one single second. I love you," Lucas said, his voice rough with emotion, "more now than I did the day we married, and I loved you plenty then." "I love you too," Zelda replied. "Thank you for seeing me, for really seeing me, when everyone else just saw a widow who needed managing." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, reluctant to leave this place that held such special meaning for them. But eventually, they had to head back to the ranch and their children and their life. As they rode home together in the gathering twilight, Zelda reflected on how strange and wonderful life could be. She had thought, after Thomas died, that her life was essentially over. Not in the sense that she wanted to die, but in the sense that she believed the best parts of her life were behind her. She had been wrong. The best parts had been yet to come, waiting for her in the form of a quiet cowboy who had simply asked if he could sit with her. The years continued to roll by. James grew into a responsible young man who took after his father in his quiet competence and his way with horses. At 19, he started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Emma who fit into the family as though she had always been there. When James asked Lucas for advice about proposing, Lucas told him the same thing he had learned. Be honest, be patient, and make sure she knows you see her as a partner, not a possession. Sarah, at 16, was developing into a strong, independent young woman who had inherited her mother's head for business and her father's steady temperament. She had no interest in courting yet, much to the disappointment of several young men in the area. She wanted to focus on her education and on learning everything she could about running the ranch. Zelda could not have been prouder. Daniel, at 13, was still finding himself, alternating between being a serious, thoughtful boy and a rambunctious teenager. He had a gift for working with cattle that neither of his siblings possessed, an almost intuitive understanding of the animals that made him invaluable during roundup season. Lucas, now in his early 40s, had some gray in his hair and lines around his eyes, but he was still strong and healthy, still the same steady presence he had always been. Zelda, approaching 40, felt like she had finally grown into herself completely. She knew who she was, what she wanted, and what mattered most in life. And what mattered most was family, love, and the ranch they had built together. One Sunday afternoon in late spring, the whole family was gathered on the porch after church. James and Emma were there, recently married and already talking about starting a family of their own. Sarah was reading a book, Daniel was whittling, and Lucas and Zelda were sitting side by side in the rocking chairs they had bought years ago. "Tell us again how you met," Emma said. She had heard the story before, but she loved hearing it, loved the romance of it. Zelda and Lucas exchanged a glance, and Zelda began the tale. I was sitting in the cemetery, visiting Thomas's grave, and I was crying. I had rejected so many suitors by then, men who wanted to marry me for my property or because they thought I needed taking care of. I was tired and sad and felt very alone. And then Papa came along, Sarah chimed in, having heard this story many times. And then your father came along, Zelda agreed, smiling at Lucas. He did not try to fix my problems or tell me everything would be all right. He just asked one simple question. Can I just sit with you? Lucas finished. It was all I wanted to do, just sit with her. I thought she was the most interesting person I had ever met, and I wanted to know her better. And you let him sit, Emma said, her eyes shining with romantic interest. I did, Zelda confirmed. And that simple act of sitting together, of just being present with each other without expectations or demands, that was the beginning of everything. The moral of the story, Lucas said, looking around at his children and his daughter-in-law, is that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be there. You do not have to have all the answers or fix everything. Sometimes, presence is enough. As the sun set on another beautiful Colorado day, the McCoy family remained on the porch, talking and laughing together. Zelda looked around at the people she loved most in the world, at the life she had built through grief and healing and unexpected love, and felt profoundly blessed. She had been a widow who rejected every suitor in town because none of them understood what she truly needed. And then, a quiet cowboy had come along and asked if he could just sit with her, and in doing so, had given her everything she had not known she was looking for. Their love story was not dramatic or flashy. There had been no grand gestures or sweeping declarations, at least not at first. Instead, it had been built on small moments, on quiet conversations and shared work, and the steady accumulation of days spent choosing each other. And that, Zelda thought, was the very best kind of love story there was. As darkness fell and the stars came out, the family finally headed inside. Lucas and Zelda were the last to leave the porch, lingering in their rocking chairs for a few moments longer. Happy? Lucas asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. Happier than I ever thought possible, Zelda replied, giving the same answer she always gave, because it was always true. They stood together, Lucas offering Zelda his arm in the same courtly gesture he had used when they were courting. She took it, and they walked into their home together, ready to face whatever the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it side by side, just as they had promised each other all those years ago on that October day in the meadow. The ranch would continue on, passed down eventually to James and Emma and their children. The legacy of Lucas and Zelda McCoy would be one of love and hard work, of respect and partnership, of two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, and had built something beautiful together. And it all started with one quiet cowboy asking one simple question. Can I just sit with you? That question, and the widow's willingness to answer yes, had changed both their lives forever, had turned loneliness into love and grief into hope. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes come from the smallest acts of kindness, and that being truly seen by another person is one of the greatest gifts we can receive. Years later, when Zelda was in her 60s and Lucas was nearing 70, they would still sit on that porch together every evening, their hands intertwined, their love as strong as ever. And if you asked them the secret to their long and happy marriage, they would tell you the same thing. They never stopped sitting with each other, never stopped being present, never stopped choosing each other day after day after day. That was all it took, and that was everything.